Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. This is amazing to me because I'm not a morning person, and to see all of you up and so excited and bright, I'm like, whoa, okay, I can do this. I can attack this day. So as she's mentioned, my name is AJ Christian. I'm really honored to be here at Creative Mornings. I've heard a lot about this. A lot of people I really respect have come through here and also talked about their own stories. So I feel like I'm in the lineage of some of my friends and mentors. I really gravitated towards this theme. I think honesty is so very important to collective action, to living your best truth, being honest with yourself, being honest with others. If I can branch off from that theme a little bit, I want to talk about honoring people's stories, allowing them and trusting that they will tell those stories honestly. I think I've done a lot in my career, but that's been a through line pretty consistently. And then the power of generating knowledge through creative practice and through community, which I think, again, necessitates honesty. It doesn't really work if you do it without honest intent. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to what I'm doing here in Chicago. I won't have any slides, which is a rare thing for me, so please be kind and generous with my performance style. I'm not an actor, though I work with them. And then I'll show a little bit of the project I'm doing here in Chicago. I have a 5-minute trailer for you that will give you a very good overview. And then I will end by talking about how I'm trying to scale this project and talk about a specific kind of creative experimental pilot that I made, which will kind of play in the background. I have the whole 15-minute video, but I'm not just gonna like show video and not talk for this particular talk, though I could. I am from New Jersey, outside New York. I grew up in a small town in Bergen County. My parents, up until very recently, still worked in the city. My mom worked at Macy's when I was growing up, and Herald Square, and I remember the most exciting thing I could do as a kid was like go into the city and go to work with her, right? I was also in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade for like 7 years growing up. So I was like a little present or like a little like, I think I was in a Conestoga wagon, which like the irony of which I could not understand at that age. So I think my mom, had me fall in love with New York City and had me fall in love with sort of creative worlds and creative practices. And it's interesting how I think I lost that when I was in my teens and I told people I wanted to go into business, which I guess in some ways I'm again circling back to, but I went to the undergrad at the University of Michigan, took one econ class and decided business was not for me. It still really isn't for me, like I'm not very good with numbers or spreadsheets or whatever, but creative business is a little bit different. I instead found journalism at the University of Michigan. I realized that I really loved to write, and I loved the practice of just calling up random people and asking them, hey, do you want to talk about this thing for like 20 minutes? And you'd be surprised how often people say yes. I mean, most of the people I called will engage your questions about a story, and I think generally speaking, tell you honest things, unless it's controversial and then you have to do a little bit more digging. I did a lot of internships in journalism. I interned for a lot of big city newspapers, ending up at sort of the Washington Post and Newsweek. But this was around 2006 or so, and I could see that journalism was not necessarily adapting to changing technologies, and it also had stopped being exciting to me because I realized that as much as I love to write, I wanted to write about what I wanted to write about, not what my editor told me to write about. And in journalism, you can choose what you want to write about, but you have to sort of wait like 10, 15 years before you get to that senior status. And I did not want to wait that long. I wanted to start right then. So I applied to grad school, kind of just applying to what my undergraduate major was, American Studies, and applying to communication, which is a field I didn't really know, but I thought they would take me because I have this journalism experience, right? I'm a media person. Got into a bunch of schools, decided on the University of Pennsylvania. It was the best program I got into. They placed professors, and it was close to New York, where I was dating someone at the time. So I went to grad school, and I decided that I would continue to do this practice of talking to people that I had done in journalism. I started interviewing people about how they express themselves through the internet. That's what I applied, being interested in. I applied because I had met my boyfriend at the time on a site called Adam for Adam, which is still around, but not one of the classier gay dating sites at this point. And I was just like, oh, I met someone interesting on these platforms. I should probably figure out why other people are connecting with people on these platforms. I wrote a paper about blogging, which thankfully hasn't seen the light of day. I wrote a couple papers about vlogging. This was right around the time that YouTube was starting to take off. And this really got me into where I am today, kind of by accident, because I realized that it wasn't just personal expression. It wasn't people just sort of being honest on YouTube for the fun of it. They were doing it because they wanted to make money. They wanted to sort of have a career as an entertainer, as a storyteller. And it was this little show called Lonely Girl 15, which I cannot believe is like 12 years old now, which was a vlog that kind of covertly turned into a scripted series that made me realize that this was television. That YouTube was television, and that the people I was talking to were television storytellers, not just personal storytellers. So that started me on a cascade of interviewing these independent producers who were making their own shows for YouTube and Vimeo. By 2012, when I secured my PhD, I'd interviewed well over 100 people and really figured out why people were doing this and how they were doing this. A lot of people I talked to didn't go to film school, they didn't know how to shoot anything. They were just people who had a story that they wanted to tell and took a risk, got their friends together and made it. And a lot of people, wanted to go into television. They were trying to break into the industry, and I was thinking, this is so weird. Like, you're in Maryland, you're in Iowa, and you're making your show for YouTube, and you want to go to Hollywood. Why are you doing this? And I realized that Hollywood was a very closed process, right? To get a show in Hollywood takes an enormous amount of social networks and infrastructure, a lot of meetings, a lot of hustling in order to get the attention of these executives who had control over what gets to be television. These executives are called development executives. They take pitches from writers who want to make their shows for TV. They are set up at traditionally described as like networks or distributors, your ABCs, FX, HBO. They're actually really great people. They're really interested in meeting artists, but they're caught in a system where there's this incredible volume of stories and only so much space and only so much money for television. And the internet really confounds this whole system, right? Because you don't need to talk to a development executive to get your show on YouTube. You just upload your show to YouTube. And I argue in what became my book that came out this year, Open TV, Innovation Beyond Hollywood and the Rise of Web Television, that the internet innovated television by opening that development process to independent producers at a time when independent producers were extremely disadvantaged in their negotiating power in Hollywood because of various forms of deregulation that occurred throughout the 1990s. So this presented me with an interesting situation where I knew a lot of talented people, and a lot of these people are people who then, while I was studying them, became sort of famous. I interviewed Issa Rae in 2011. I interviewed Abby Jacobson and Alana Glazer in 2012. I interviewed the creators of High Maintenance, Katya Blickfeld and Ben Sinclair, in I think 2012 or so. And then, all my academic advisors told me, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. This is marginal. Hollywood's not going to pay attention to this. And then, by the time I got my PhD, it was like HBO deal, Comedy Central deal, FX deal. And so I was like, oh, wait, but development executives are looking at this stuff, right? But it was only a handful of shows that was actually getting sold. And so this led me to my current project, which really is about solving this problem of development. It just seems to me that in a global age where we all have access to so many cultures and information and stories at our fingertips, that the process of getting a TV show made would be based solely in Hollywood, right? And a little bit in New York, where you have to really be there to get a TV show. But these are all global platforms, right? They're not just LA or New York or even US-based platforms. So I came here to Chicago to try and figure out a way to innovate in the development process and also maybe innovate a research method of working with creative people to generate knowledge, right? To actually generate an understanding, a deeper understanding of the world. During my PhD year, I did make a web series. It's called She's Out of Order. It's cute. It didn't get picked up by HBO, but my partner wrote it and I sort of co-produced it with his production partners, Ronnie Green and Teresa Lastly, who's the creator of the show. And that sort of got my feet wet in terms of like, oh, I can produce something and actually write about it. And that case study is in my book. But I wanted to do it bigger. I had a budget now as an assistant professor. I thought I could support more creators. And so that led me to the idea of a platform. That wasn't my original idea. My original idea was just to use my money to create sort of short form pilots, put them on the web, see if any of them went viral and would get picked up. And I started producing the first one called Lupita Obama Creates Voga, which I wrote in collaboration with three performance artists here in the city, Eric Wallace, Kiam Junio, and Saya Naomi, a hip hop artist, performance artist, and drag queen. And I'll get to that in a second because they come back to the story at the end. But then while I was doing that, this wonderful person named Sam Bailey emailed me wanting to get covered on my blog, which I maintained in grad school. All the interviews I did, I put on my blog to let people know I was doing this work. And she was like, hey, I have this show, would you write about it? And I was like, well, I'm on tenure track and blogging doesn't count for tenure, so I can't write about your show, but I have this other project, maybe I can help you out. I met with her, she had already shot this show called You're So Talented, and showed me the first episode, which was like, I was sort of shook because it was like one of the most beautiful, fully realized first episodes of web series that I'd seen at that point, studying the market for like 6 years. And she just needed a little bit of money to complete post-production. So I wrote her a small check and I had my first series. And since then, it's now been 3 years. We've released over 30 pilots and series, most of them original series, narrative series, all Chicago-based except for one exception. Yeah, give it up for Chicago. Y'all really do it over here. So yeah, over 30 series. We've shown in festivals, from the Tribeca Film Festival to the Frameline Film Festival. We're Emmy nominated, a Streamy Award winner as of this weekend for Best Indie Series 2 years in a row. All intersectional artists based in Chicago. And it really, for me, I've learned so much from this project. One was the power of course, community in creating content. The other, I think, is the power of interdisciplinarity and thinking about all art forms as interdisciplinary, but especially TV and film. I was super inspired by this show called Soul, which has a documentary that's about to come out called Mr. Soul. It's from 1968 to 1973, and it was the first sort of black TV show, and they just gave Ford Foundation mostly just gave black people money to make a TV show, and it ended up being the national TV debuts of like Earth, Wind & Fire, and Donny Hathaway, and Toni Morrison, and Sonia Sanchez, and Nikki Giovanni, and just like on and on and on and on. Stevie Wonder, like everyone came through that show. And I saw that show and I was like, whoa, why isn't TV like this? Why don't we have dance and poetry and things like that? So I'm gonna show you OTV because I think in some ways Chicago, being outside of Hollywood, has been able to do TV differently. I think the scripted series here are more honest, actually, because people are more interested in just telling their stories, less interested in selling their stories first. I mean, people want to make money, right? But they want to be true first. And I've been able to collaborate with a bunch of artists in different mediums, which you will see in this trailer. This summarizes our programming from 2017 to 2018.
Everything's gonna be okay. Yep.
Fuck, ow!
You're the one that won't let your eyebrows stand in their truth, okay? You asked me to do this.
Well, Sheila. I had no idea how hetero-flexible you were.
Good morning, sunshine.
This witch hunt is ongoing.
Eradicate difference in the alternative. A historical struggle to eradicate magic.
Doesn't sound like she's a very good friend, though.
No, she's like my best friend.
Desire is a very complicated thing.
Hello, headshot and white resume, please.
Yeah, here you go.
Thank you very much.
We want to tell you a classic timeless story.
Know your self-worth and then add tax.
Am I in the picture? Can you see me? Is my hair cut off?
No, but your forehead's cut off.
Still feel guilty that the prayer I prayed for my father was prison. I want to be free. I want to see you free.
No, not Pakistan, Pakistan. No, I'm not saying it with an accent. You're saying it with an accent. Actually, you're saying it completely wrong.
Papi. Cállate con esta mierda.
Do you ever think that, we could work again?
I figured it out. What a bird looks like. They like being warm. They like synthetic fibers. They like young, pheromone-ridden, euphoric bodies. And then I was like, oh, follow the tumbleweave.
Don't you remember? At the bar, you said that you were into him, so you made me give him my phone number.
You see, everything comes back to money. Money.
Girl, I'm gathered. And on that note, we're done here. Immediately as fuck.
Mom worries about the suits and ties. I grew up liking boys, but also had a strong attraction to, and affinity for women.
I'm in a book club where we only read Quran.
MashaAllah.
I thought I turned off the notifications.
Let's be clear. I'm the Beyonce. I don't get kicked out.
Miley Cyrus and Katy Perry were chasing after me.
Danielle, we are too old for this shit. I'm not catching a charge for some tampons.
Listen.
Practicing a parigraha brings satisfaction to your current state of being without turning outwards for validation. I heard you've been packing the studio lately.
I have, actually. It's been a lot of work. Been trying to keep up with the likes of you.
No, don't do that. I'm fine.
Now, this is the first time a Black-owned firm will handle such a big project on behalf of the city.
Give it up for all those artists. I mean, this is, so I'm going to talk a little bit about OTV and how much stuff do I have? Yeah, mic still works. So I'm going to talk a little bit about OTV while behind the scenes, you'll just sort of see the pilot that I shot, which I will get to in this discussion of OTV eventually. But this is just the whole pilot, it's 15 minutes, so it's just going to sort of play in the background. So OTV is a platform for intersectional television and a research project in creative R&D. My idea is that this kind of small-scale, localized production might actually have underseen value in a global networked economy where you have companies like Netflix and Amazon spending upwards of $4, $6, $8 billion a year developing original series when our annual budget is about, well, let's say it's much, much less than that. And yet, I think we've been able to make disproportionate cultural impact versus our investment. And my idea is that artists, given the ability to tell their own stories honestly, is a very powerful thing, and that the platforms should exist merely to lift that up and give them as many resources to do that as possible. So in this sort of wild experiment that I've created, artists drive the process. They own their own intellectual property. On this platform, we don't take any of their intellectual property, and our distribution agreements are non-exclusive. The idea really is to enable them to be free, both in the production and in the distribution of their stories. We just want to be one home to these kinds of stories and show Hollywood, show various kinds of stakeholders of the incredible talent and diversity outside of their existing supply chains. So, the process goes with, someone pitches me something and I say, okay, that's probably a great idea. Is it intersectional? Is it Chicago? Okay, I'll help you out. We start with fundraising. So most of our shows are funded by grants and crowdfunding. And we can assist artists along those processes, so they have to write the grants and do the campaign. We can consult on both of those things. And once they have the money, some artists already have crews set up, they know how to do it. Other artists, they might know the DP and a sound editor, but they need a gaffer, they need a location, they need insurance. And again, we have existing relationships from the community to assist them in doing that as best we can. Usually we can help, sometimes, a lot of times we can't. Once the show is done, we release everything in Chicago, everything gets a Chicago screening before it goes online. We want to hear from our community before we hear from the rest of the world. At those screenings, I do surveys, I get demographic information, I get some snap comments from our local audience. Then it goes online, we publish it on Vimeo, which I can explain in the Q&A why I do that, and then across our other 4 social media projects. Though a lot of our artists also have their own social media pages, and we encourage them to do that because that allows their specific fans to find them and engage with their own content. We're just merely a hub. Actually, a lot of our shows have bigger social media followings than we do for that reason, and that's totally okay with me. And all of that, the data from all of that process, from interviewing artists in the beginning of the process and the end of the process, seeing how they produce things, seeing who funds them, seeing the views online, what is the take-up locally, and then eventually, what is the interest from outside stakeholders, for me is all data. It's all data that goes into peer-reviewed journal articles, and will eventually be going into my second book. I think my title right now is Scaling R&D, the Queer Art of Research and Development. My idea is that small-scale research and development might actually be a more efficient way of doing things in this global networked era versus spending millions and millions of dollars on people who are just in Hollywood and in New York. So to intervene in this development process, I always like to come up with like a really weird experiment. And this is where Hair Story was born. So Hair Story, which is what you're seeing right now, started in 2017 with our very first writers workshop. We had a residency at the Chicago Cultural Center and convened new writers to develop their own shows with each other, just get feedback with each other. At the end of that workshop, I pitched to everyone in that room that if they could see their character living in a predominantly black co-op on the south side of Chicago, that they should contribute their character to an experimental show that at the time was called Serial Dreamer. Serial Dreamer would focus on each of those characters in every episode, and they would tell you a story about themselves that you would see represented as a music video or as like a kind of drunk history style narrated scene. And you've seen drunk history, right? But the idea is like they get someone drunk and they tell a story from history, and the episode is just that person's voice, like over a narrative that they filmed that's that historical reenactment. It's really good for production efficiency if you don't have to record the sound synchronously. It cuts down your costs considerably. And so these are the people who said yes to that proposal. So all the characters you see here are actually stars of their own show. And in this series, if I got the chance to make the full series, I would have Gia, who you might not be able to see in any of these frames, is one of the members of the house who does hair, and she would do the hair of every individual person in the house. That episode would start with them having messy hair. It'd end with them having a totally new do, right? They're transformed, and while Gia's doing their hair, they would tell Gia a story about transformation, sort of whatever story they is, and that story would serve as a backdoor pilot for their own show, right? It would introduce that character, and we could then take that episode to network stakeholders, studios, and say, hey, this is a new writer, they have a really interesting voice, watch this episode that gives you a glimpse into what they can do, give us money to make that show, right? So we released this year. We premiered it at the Art Institute, showed it at Black Cinema House on the South Side, and I'm currently writing grants and talking to stakeholders to see if we can get some of these spin-offs made or get the entire show made. Getting the entire show made would be complicated because I want all these artists to have ownership of their stories, right? And so we have around 8 or so intellectual property holders within one show, which is quite a contractual nightmare. But I think of this as a queer development process, right? We're disrupting the norms of how shows are developed in order to exponentially create more stories about different kinds of people. I don't know if we'll have time to get to the part in the pilot where you actually see the music video, but the music video for this show is quite amazing. It is from Roy Kinsey, who's a local West Side hip-hop artist. He released an album called Blackie this year. He just released another album called More Roy. He's been reviewed in LA Times and Billboard and all these things. It's a wonderful album about growing up sort of Black and queer in Chicago and trying to understand your own history in that context. So we might not get it, but please do check out Hair Story. And finally, I want to wrap up with just sort of how am I going to scale this project? What am I going to do next? I've now had 3 rounds of meetings in Hollywood. I've met with pretty much all the major networks that would entertain working with emerging creators, mostly cable and streaming networks. I've met with smaller studios, digital studios, independent film studios, agents, managers, excuse me. And I basically asked them sort of what would it take for you to, for us to create a pipeline from Chicago to Hollywood? Chicago has a lot of challenges for creating a really robust TV and film economy, one of which is that very few, actually I don't think any of the shows that are shot here are written here. They're all written in LA, sometimes by Chicago writers, but those writers have to go to LA and move there for a few months to pitch this show, and then the writers' rooms take place there as well. So I think we need writers' rooms here in Chicago. We also need representation, right? Every TV show that's big gets negotiated by mostly 3 agencies, CAA, UTA, and WME. There are a couple smaller ones that sometimes broker deals, but they don't have offices here, so they don't really know about the talent here. So one of the strengths is that we have a really big roster of diverse talent that Hollywood has no eyes on whatsoever. But to get a deal made in Hollywood, you need the agent, you often need a manager, you need a production studio, you need a network, sometimes you need financing, sometimes you need a sponsor on board as well, right? So there's all these different stakeholders. And the reason why we don't have diverse shows in Hollywood is merely it takes so much social capital, cultural capital, economic capital, and these are communities that don't usually have access to that, right? And each one of those stakeholders has historically underrepresented my community, right? So we have to create everything, I think is what I'm basically going to pitch. I'm going to pitch this to artists in January and maybe to Hollywood next year, of really creating a full-fledged a studio that also manages artists, that has labs for experimental work to collect all the data, so that everything that we do is research-backed, that has a community engagement component, so we're engaging our community here in Chicago and getting that kind of local buzz, local traction. And I think that if we can find the necessary stakeholders to actually finance that, we could really change the way television is developed. We could create a model that's scalable nationally, if not globally, of ways to actually get people funding for their projects, seeding pilots in community, online, marketing artists, branding those writers, so that when they come to the big players, they're able to say, I've already produced two seasons of a show, I already have an audience, I already have a social media following, I know what my voice is, and I have a team of writers that I can work with, right? So all of the barriers that have been historically put up against our communities will maybe potentially fall away, and we might actually see more interesting, more out-of-the-box, more diverse kinds of stories on television. And I think with that, I will stop. I hopefully haven't gone over time. Thank you for listening.